Amen. Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. Judge not that you be not judged. That's probably one of the most quoted verses next to John 3:16 in the Bible. How many people have ever heard in a religious discussion with someone about something or even about a moral issue, someone say to you, you can't judge? Jesus said, do not judge. Raise your hand. Probably everyone has heard this. Many people don't even know where this is found. They don't know who said it. They don't know the context of it. But that's a verse they know. And what that means is you can't say this is wrong. That's what they mean by it. And they say you're judging. You should not judge. And here's the irony of that. They're judging you by saying you're wrong for judging. They're doing the very thing that they say you cannot do. Oh, you're wrong, you're judging. Well, you just judged me. You just judged me. And so we have to see what this passage is talking about to see what kind of judging Jesus is saying. What people believe this verse means here in chapter 7 and verse 1 is that you cannot say anything is wrong. You cannot say any behavior is wrong. You cannot say anything is contrary to the will of God. Now, it usually means unless they really don't like it themselves. If they really don't like it, then you can say it's wrong. For example, they don't like Adolf Hitler. He did some bad things. Really bad things. Millions of people died under his rule. So yeah, you could say Adolf Hitler was bad. He did bad things. So they're okay with that. Most people are. But if you say President Obama has bad immoral policies, they'll be off the chart angry with you. And they'll say, oh, you're judging. You're judging. Now, what we need to do is we need to see in the context of what's going on here when Jesus is condemning judging. Is he condemning all judging or is he condemning a particular type of judging? Well, let's see. Matthew 7 and verse 2. For with what judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with what measure you use, it will be measured back to you. The way you judge others will come back on you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and do not consider the plank in your own eye? The beam, depending on the translation you have. Talking about a large piece of wood. Hypocrite. First remove the plank from your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Then in verse 6, which goes along with this, do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. And we'll talk about the meaning of verse 6 in just a moment. But it goes along with the concept of judging. Judge not that you be not judged. The way you judge is going to come back on you. And then he gives the example. And it's a rather humorous example here. I believe this is an example of a humor used to teach a moral lesson. He says that the type of judging that he is condemning here is hypocritical judging. Hypocritical judging. And he gives the example of a man with a beam or a plank sticking out of his eye. And I've seen this depicted in cartoons. They tried to visualize what Jesus is saying here. And they would have a person that had a 2x4 sticking out of his eye. That's exactly the image Jesus is giving. And this person with a big plank sticking out of his eye, an obvious problem, obviously, you see someone with with a plank sticking out of their eye, there's some problems there. Obvious to everybody. But He wants to remove a little speck that's in your eye. You know, just looking at people, you can't see a speck in their eye. You have to look very closely, look real close in their eyes to see the specks. Well, here's a guy with a big plank in his eye wanting to look very closely at your eye and to see if there's a speck to remove it. He says that's hypocritical. He says, first remove the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck out of your brother's eye. The things that people do that are hypocritical, that are obvious, that are contrary to what the Bible says, everyone sees it, yet they want to correct other people. Let me give you an example. When I preached in Cleburne, there was a man who was a Bible teacher there, and he smoked. And he would smoke right before church service. In fact, he would open the door for people to come in while smoking a cigarette. Obvious problem. Obvious problem. One time I gave a lesson and he didn't agree with it. And he wanted to correct some things that I said in a lesson and to try to help me out and tell me that I was wrong on some things that I said. Here's a man who's addicted to drugs. It's a harmful product. He even says on the package, this is harmful for you. Not only that, the secondhand smoke that he was bellowing out of his mouth was harmful to those around him. I mean, there's no question about it. It's harmful. And yet he wants to correct some things that I say. Now, I'm not above correction. I know that if I say something that's wrong or that's incorrect, I'm open to that. But I pretty much resented, here's a man who has a problem, who doesn't seem to want to change it, wanting to correct me. It's like people who are living in adultery and adulterous marriages, but yet they say, they look down upon homosexuality as, oh, that's a wicked, evil lifestyle. Well, what about your lifestyle? What about yours? It's adulterous. Adulterers are going to go to hell the same as homosexuals. So it's that hypocritical type of judging that Jesus is condemning here, in which a person has obvious, blatant sin in their life, and they want to correct a speck. You know, we all have specks in our eyes. We're all flawed. Every single one of us have flaws. And you look closely at any one of our lives, you're going to see some flaws. And that's just how we are as humans. We're flawed people. I'll give you another example of this, where there was a man here years ago. He would only come to church maybe once a month. Maybe once a month. But he sat down with me with a list of grievances about my preaching. He didn't like my preaching, how I preached. Had a list of grievances about some of the things I said. And Jennifer was sitting there and we were listening to it. I let him say all that, and I said, I find it strange that you want to complain about my preaching, but you're only here once a month. I said, do you get tapes of my sermons and listen to them? He said, no. So at best, you're hearing one sermon a month. One. And you want to complain about my preaching. And yet you're not here to worship and assemble with the church. Well, of course, that made him mad. They went down the road. But here's a person with a plank in their eye wanting to correct my specks. And of course I know that my preaching is not perfect. No preacher's preaching is perfect. There's only one perfect preacher, and that's Christ. But someone who only shows up once a month to worship service and wants to complain about the preacher's preaching, really? First, remove that plank out of your own eye, then you can see clearly. So the type of judging that Jesus here is condemning is hypocritical and hypercritical. What I mean by hypercritical is they're extremely critical of other people, but they can't see their own obvious sin. That plank that's sticking out of their eye. And when you're hypercritical, that criticism will come back on you. What goes around comes around, that concept. We are to be people who judge, but in a proper way. Now look at, first of all, let's look at another example of hypocritical judging. Look at Romans chapter 2. The Jews were very guilty of this in condemning the Gentiles and their sins. The Jews could not see their own sins, but they had obvious sins that Paul pointed out. He says in verse 21, Romans 2 and verse 21, "You therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the law, do you dishonor God through breaking the law?" Go back to the very beginning of the chapter, Romans chapter 2, verse 1. "Therefore you are inexcusable, O man," talking to the Jews, "whoever you are who judge, for in whatever you judge another, you condemn yourself, for you who judge practice the same things." God's righteous standard. Not our own opinion, but by God's righteous standard. Now look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. There was some people going to court in Corinth that were brethren. Paul condemns that and said, you need to work this out. You don't need to take your issues before the courts, suing one another. That brings reproach upon the church. He even says there in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 1, "Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to the law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Do you not know that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life?" So he is in a context there saying, how dare you take your issues of disagreement and strife before the unrighteous courts to settle it. You go to law before the unrighteous and not before saints. You should all get together and try to work all this out. He reminds them in verse 2, the saints, Christians, will judge the world. Not only that, he says, we will judge angels. Now, I don't know what all is involved in that. If this has something to do with the judgment day, which most likely it does, talking about the spiritual beings, the angels, we're going to have part somehow in the judging of angels. But the point is, look, if we're going to be judging angels, and if we're going to be judging the world, can't y'all figure out how to get along with one another and settle your issues without going to the courts? Christians should not be going before the courts to settle issues. It's a shame when that happens. It brings reproach upon the church, and it's a worldly thing. So he reminds them, do you not know that the saints will judge the world? So we need to be understanding that the righteous judgment is under consideration here. In fact, in the previous chapter, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, he talks about withdrawing fellowship from a man living wickedly. He says in verse 13, those who are outside God judges, talking about the concept of punishing, therefore, put away from yourself the evil person. Well, you have to figure out what evil is and what an evil person is. That's righteous judging, to be able to withdraw fellowship from them. So the concept of judging here is applying God's Word to our life first and foremost, and then to those around us. We got to make sure we're living righteously, we're doing what's right, we don't have a plank sticking out of our eye, an obvious sin sticking out of our eyes that everyone can see, and we're trying to go around correcting everyone else. It causes strife, it causes difficulty. I've seen people before who want to go around and correct everyone else, and they have obvious sin in their life that they don't want to deal with, but they want to correct everyone else. And that's the type of hypocritical judging that Jesus is condemning here. Any questions or comments about this?
Yes, John, I heard a guy one time he was condemning drunkenness. He was being drunk, yet he was known for drinking. He casually drank.
Right.
And I think that's another example.
Exactly.
Christ is condemning here.
Right. If a person drinks socially any amount, they can't say a word about anyone else. They can't when it comes to drinking. They got that plank in their own eye that they need to remove. Then they can see clearly. Now, Jesus even makes it very clear there. You can see clearly to judge when you have that plank removed from your own eye. We're to judge people righteously according to God's righteous standard. When we see someone that's immodestly dressed, or we see someone that is engaging in sinful behavior, we are not applying our own standard, and we are to apply God's standard and not have a knee-jerk reaction and jump to conclusions. Sometimes brethren can, according to appearance, jump to conclusions that are unwarranted by the evidence. One time there was a man that wasn't wearing his wedding ring anymore. And people started gossiping and saying, oh, he's having marital problems. He's having marital problems. So it started spreading. This person's got marital problems. He's not wearing his wedding ring. The truth of the matter is he gained weight and he couldn't wear his wedding ring anymore. It got too tight on him, so he couldn't wear it on his finger, and people drawed a unwarranted conclusion based on that and judged him as having marital problems. That's wrong. Yes.
And then you get this case where you have a crowd of people and they so-called Christians,
Mm-hmm.
but their mouth is filthy than the people they're with, and then they want to condemn them.
Right, exactly. Speaking just as filthily as the people around them. And it is. It's hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy. I was watching a documentary, I think it was yesterday. It was about some people in West Virginia. That was a family notorious for criminal activity. I had to turn it off because there was so much bad language in it. And I was by myself. I didn't have any around with me, but I couldn't watch it anymore. The language was so bad. And they were following this certain family for a year there in West Virginia. And this family was notorious for getting in trouble and having all kinds of problems. But they would show their house, and in the house they were smoking pot in, the house that they were cussing in and drinking moonshine and such, they'd have pictures of Jesus on the mantle, or what they think Jesus looks like. Pictures of Jesus over here, picture of a cross over here. It's hypocrisy, really? And it's just the hypocritical type of thing that's going on, and they would speak against people and talk about people, and I'd turn it off. The language was just horrible. And so hypocrisy, we need to be sure that we're judging. And people say, I don't want to go to a church that judges me. What do they mean by that? calls me out. That's one way of looking at it. Right. Doesn't want them to feel guilty. They're comfortable. They don't want to be called out. They don't want to be judged. And really, our attitude should be that we want to be in a church that judges us because it helps us to grow. Judges us righteously. Is what I mean. Judges us in a proper way to help us. Because if you go to a congregation or a church and they're never going to say anything about how you dress, how you behave, anything, just as long as you show up and put some money in the plate. Show up, put money in the plate, we're happy with you. We're not going to ask about your marriage. We're not going to ask whether you divorced and remarried according to Matthew 19:9 or not. We don't want to know, don't care. Show up, put money in the plate, we're happy with you. And they think they're loving, they're tolerant. And that's not the kind of church that's healthy. That's not healthy. Because you get people that will go there and they might have a large crowd, but you have a large crowd of people who won't repent. We need to go to a church, and I want my children to grow up to, when they get out on their own, to find a church that's going to keep an eye on them as they keep an eye on that church. Hopefully they can find a good eldership to be under that's going to shepherd them. Keep an eye on them. That's the concept of an eldership. The word for bishop or overseer means a superintendent. To look out for one another. So we do judge. In fact, here's the irony of judging. People who say you can't judge are some of the most judgmental people you'll come across. They will give you their opinion just like that, whether it's solicited or not. Very judgmental. But then they'll turn around and say you can't judge. And another thing is, when people say you can't judge, it almost always means negatively. But those same people will judge positively, and that seems to be okay. When you tell someone, or you speak of someone and say they're a good person, you can just tell they're a good Christian person. Do you not know you're judging them? You're looking at their life and saying they look like they're a good person, and in comparison to the Bible, they're being judged. They're being judged. And the same people who would condemn a preacher or a teacher that would judge and say a certain behavior is wrong or is unbiblical, if they say something that they like, will say, that was a good sermon. It fits in the fact of being a fruit inspector, right? Right. Right, right. You're just basing it on what you know and what you can see as far as to the extent of being able to judge. And the concept of judging, when you look at judging also from a negative standpoint, if you look at Romans chapter 14, when it comes to opinions and in different matters, we all have an opinion on something, whether we should do something or not. And, for example, you have some brethren who have absolutely nothing to do with Christmas. They won't have anything to do with Christmas. Then you have others who will celebrate Christmas as a secular holiday, but not engage in anything religious with it. And that's where we are. I mean, that's where I am and my family. We celebrate Christmas as a secular holiday, but we don't have anything to do with the concept of it being the birthday of Jesus. That's not biblical. But you have some brethren who say we shouldn't have anything to do with Christmas at all. We should stay away from it at all. Well, that's an opinion they can have. And in Romans chapter 14, it talks about the law of liberty and how of eating some foods bothered some brethren of the first century because of their Jewish background, in which there was foods that were forbidden, and some of them knew that some of these foods and meats were sacrificed to idols, and that bothered their conscience. So he says there in Romans 14 and verse 1, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to dispute over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak only eats vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. So these are in different matters of opinion. Look at verse 13. After talking about how we're going to be judged by God and give an account to God, therefore, Romans 14:13, let us not judge one another anymore, but rather resolve this, not to put a stumbling block or a cause to fall in our brother's way. And he talks further in the chapter about love would not cause our brother to do something that would bother them. I'll give you an example of that. You might teach and convert someone out of the religion of Islam. They're now a Christian. But all their life they have been taught it's wrong to eat pork. That's how they were raised. That's how they were brought up. In their mind, it is wrong to eat pork, sausage, bacon, any kind of pork product. If I try to get that person to eat pork against their conscience, I'm sinning against them. Because in their mind, they have not gotten over the fact that pork is an unclean thing to eat and should not be eaten. They have not come to grips with that. They might know it, but they're not all the way there yet. So it would be unloving for me to offer them pork to eat or to bring a pork product to one of our fellowship meals. We should, out of love, respect their conscience and say we're going to bring food, but we're not going to bring any pork products because we don't want to violate our brother's conscience and cause him to stumble. That's where the law of love will come in. Now, he is going on the same law of love, will say, I'm not going to judge you for eating pork and say you're going to hell. It bothers me, but I'm not going to judge you for eating pork. And so that's how we can all get along. That's how we all get along with this. Because we all have opinions when it comes to optional matters. Any questions or comments about that? Now look at verse 6 of Matthew chapter 7. This definitely involves proper judging. Do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. There are some people, spiritually speaking, who are dogs and are swine. We even use those words today in our society to describe people's moral behavior. When you say, she's a dog, is that a compliment? No. And I'm not talking about how she looks. I'm talking about her behavior. She's a dog. That's not a compliment. That means she is an immoral woman. Or you say, he's a pig. Again, not about how he looks, but his moral behavior, he's a pig. That's an insult. He's an immoral, disgusting person. There are people who are like that have no regard to holy things. They have no regard to spiritual matters. And Jesus is saying here in verse 6, don't waste your time on them. Don't waste your time on people like that. Now, you don't know if a person is like that until you spend some time with them and try to teach them. You cannot see a person and say, "Oh, that person, he ain't going to listen." Like, he's covered with tattoos, his hair is purple and it's all spiked up. He ain't going to listen to the gospel. We can't do that. We need to go up to those people and try to teach them. We need to try to teach them. And if they reject it and they show themselves to be spiritual dogs and spiritual swine, they mock, they make fun of, they laugh at the gospel, then this is exactly what Jesus is saying. You need to stay away from them. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 6. So depending on how they respond to you will determine what kind of person or disposition they are. You know, Paul used this very word to describe the Judaizing teachers in Philippians chapter 3 in verse 2. Philippians 3 and verse 2. Beware of dogs, beware of evil workers, beware of the mutilation. Beware of dogs. It's not talking about your dogs at your house that might bite you. Beware of dogs. He's talking about people who are spiritually dangerous to be around. Dogs, almost without exception throughout the Bible, is a word that is used to describe people who are morally unclean and people that were wicked and defiled. And so you have that concept there. Now, and back to Matthew. Yes?
Would that be like you approach somebody and they say you, I just want to hear the Bible, I don't believe in God, I don't care what the Bible says, you're not going to convince me.
That's it. You're wasting your time. You go somewhere place else. There was, I think it might have been a university in Texas, I forgot which one, in which a group of people set up a stand there on campus, and it made the news, where if you would bring them a Bible, they would give you pornography. In exchange for a Bible, where they were atheists, you give them a Bible, they would give you pornography. Because they would take those Bibles and destroy them. It's that type of people. That type of people, they're spiritual dogs, spiritual swine. Wicked, evil individuals that mock Christianity. They're called scoffers in the Bible. They'll mock and they'll scoff at holy things. So being able to judge also means you need to know what is holy and what is righteous and apply that properly when it comes to discerning who we're going to talk to and who we're trying to reach with the gospel. So verses 1 through 6 of Matthew chapter 7 is dealing with improper judging. Improper judging. Not all judging altogether, but improper judging, which is hypocritical. And so we need to point that out when people will quote that verse. Now, very quickly, we only have just a few more minutes. We'll look at verses 7 and 8. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. For everyone who asks, receive. He who seeks, finds. And to him who knocks, it will be opened. Now, the language there denotes you keep on asking, you keep on seeking, you keep on knocking. And when we keep on doing that, God will bless us. Because He cares for us. Verse 9, or what man is there among you who, if he has a son, asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to you who ask Him? Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. So we are to seek and keep on seeking, keep on knocking, Keep on asking, and God will bless as we seek to do His will, knowing that God only has our best interest in mind, always. Always. And He will abundantly bless us. We'll stop right there, and next week, Lord willing, we will hopefully finish up Matthew chapter 7.